Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 22 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined today, as always, by my colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
Caffeinated. I'm very caffeinated. I
I've
found
got
a new
decaf.
way of doing. I found a new way of doing my coffee. So coffee machine. I'm posh. I have a bean to cup coffee machine. It was 200 whole pounds, I think. Yeah. And I used to do a long black, which was just a shot pulled very long through it. I've discovered that Americanos with 2 shots taste a lot better than that. So that's what I do now, which means I'm now 4 coffees in instead of 2.
Is this as a result of the conversation we had with the barista at the Costa Coffee in Leicester Forest East Services, or have you just gone your own way with this? Because we did have a recent discussion about this with a barista.
We
I was there.
did. Yes, we did. And I can't remember what that conversation was about. We asked the difference between
A long black and
but
an
they had
Americano, I think it was.
yes, but they had a funny thing on the menu, didn't they? That you asked about first.
Yeah, I don't
Can't
recall what
remember.
it was now. Yeah, it's not left an impression.
No.
So. Anyway,
it's something about flat white versus something that was like not quite a flat white.
flat black.
black.
What's a flat black? Yeah, what's a flat black? I don't know. Let's ask our guest, Iain Elder. How are you doing today, Iain?
Hi, Carl. I'm great, thanks. I can't really tell you much about the different kinds of coffee, to be honest. I do drink it every day, but I'm a bit ignorant about the different kinds. Definitely not a connoisseur.
Fair enough.
As long as it's black and caffeinated, then it does the job.
So Iain has very kindly agreed to join us as our guest today. He's a fellow AWS community builder, which probably means that he enjoys his coffee from an AWS community builder cup. Is that right, Iain?
Oh, yeah. No, I love to go out for walks in the mornings carrying that if I don't get to enjoy it at home.
I can't get it in focus. Hang on.
Not the community builder cup.
That's
not
partner
the
summit.
coffee cup. You've got
It
a
is.
tumbler as well.
It's no, it's from the partner summit, so it's not community builder. It's different.
You're just trying to rub in the fact that I left the partner summit early and didn't qualify for the swag again, aren't you? Thank you, John, for reminding me.
Well, no, but now that you mention it, no, I'm in trouble at home because I keep using things like the community builder cup, and they have to be washed up by hand, and I don't like washing up. This can go in the dishwasher, so it goes in the dishwasher.
Premium AWS swag. Anyway, Iain, tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do for a living? What do you do for the community, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm an independent consultant. I've been working with AWS since about 2015. I specialize these days in security posture management and cost optimization, general automation. I'll build custom solutions, whatever it is that my customer wants, but these are normally the reasons why customers get in touch with me. Recently, I've been exploring more effective ways to build landing zones using services that AWS recommends, such as Control Tower and other solutions, because John's reaction said it all. I'm not a big fan of Control Tower either, but it is the easy option for people to get started. And on a lot of client projects, I've seen the remnants of Control Tower. They've moved away from it, but haven't done all the cleanup. So yeah, that's probably something that John and I could rant on about for hours.
It's not on the agenda for today's episode, so maybe we'll have to do a special about Control Tower.
We nearly did, kind of, not on the pod, but the user group, if you recall. It was an emergency special because we were supposed to have someone from a local company talking about something, and he pulled out because he wasn't very well. Fair enough. I had about 24 hours notice to pull a talk out of thin air. So it was about why Control Tower is awful.
Out of the cloud. You pulled it from the cloud, John.
I pulled it from somewhere.
Anyway, I just got visions now of disused World War II airfields after Iain mentioned remnants of Control Tower. That's what I was kind of thinking, and maybe that's a great graphic that we could use for that particular special episode.
Well, there's lots of those around here, isn't there? Because Carl and I are both in the southeast of England, and big staging grounds for back then. So there's lots of it still around, which is always fun to go and find.
I do love a bit of World War II history. Currently watching a documentary about the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II. Anyway, we're not here to talk about coffee or World War II. We are here to talk about AWS news. And regular listeners to the podcast will know that once a week on a Friday, I curate a list of AWS news that I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. And then John and I, together with our guest, select a subset of those articles that we would like to talk to you about on the podcast. So we do, of course, have such a selection of articles this week. And the first one is from a regularly featured publication, InfoQ, and it's all about AWS Fargate significantly improving Windows container launch times. John, I know you love Windows and you love containers, so I'm really interested to hear what you've got to say about Fargate significantly improving Windows container launch times.
Thank Christ for that. That whichever deity you subscribe to, thank them for this. Yeah, Windows containers. When containerization first kind of came along, it wasn't really a thing. It was all Linux, fine, whatever. And the logic behind that was you couldn't run one OS's container on top of a different OS. That was kind of the restriction at the time. That's kind of all gone away, and you can sort of run whatever you like now. Great. Why do you want to containerize Windows applications? Well, because you don't want to run a whole Windows server, because that's awful and you value your time. Great. However, they were still quite slow to launch because even sort of a skinny cut down version of Windows, it was still running Windows fundamentally. And what they've managed to do, the AWS team, doesn't say which team, but a very clever bunch of engineers, I should suspect, have worked out how to run some optimized Windows AMIs for Fargate, which means that there's less setup, there's less latency, it just runs faster generally, and this is all good stuff. So if you are stuck running something like a .NET app on Windows, because I know you can do .NET on Linux, but it's a bit janky. If you are stuck running something like a .NET app on Windows or a PowerShell script for, whatever reason in a Fargate task, this means it launches a whole hell of a lot faster, which we like. Basic. I don't think it's quite at parity with things like slim Linux images, but more better. Like, I don't like Windows generally for running applications if you can help it because it's flaky. But if you do have to, you shouldn't have to suffer unnecessarily because you're having to suffer anyway. So let's try and make the runtime environment at least half decent.
Thoughts on this one, Iain, yourself?
Yeah, well, my Windows knowledge is quite out of date now. I last used
Windows is
Server
quite out of date now. It's
20. Yeah, well, 2012 was the last version that I was using in production. In a previous career when I was working a lot with SQL Server, that for me is probably the killer application for Windows. I can't think of another reason to actually use it. But I had to read up on some of the tech that made this speedier launch possible. So the obvious thing about Windows Server 2012 is just rip out the features that you're not going to use in the container. So the GUI and the desktop, that all in a normal server image is just part of it, and that makes it many gigabytes bigger. So if you remove that, that's less stuff to load up every time. But the most interesting feature for me was something in EC2 that I didn't know existed. This clever engineering team, John, that you referred to, it seems like what they've done is figure out how to remove all of the manual toil involved with getting a Windows installation ready. The first time you run Windows, it needs to download updates, and then it needs to restart, and then it maybe needs to do that more than once until it's ready to go. So behind the scenes, there's a new feature. Well, I don't know if it's new. It's new to me. I learned about it this week, called Fast Launch, which basically runs that process in the background for any Windows AMI that you're going to use, makes a snapshot, and then you take that snapshot, and it's just farming out new snapshots that you can use whenever you need to launch a new instance of your Windows. So yeah, they've automated that drudgery, which is why it's faster now. I think you need to pay for that process if you use the feature, but there are minimal costs involved. Your time is more valuable than whatever EC2 is going to charge you. So it's a winner all round.
I mean, that's the killer point, isn't it? And we're guilty of this as engineering types and all the rest of it. Everyone's always going on about keep your cloud cost spend down, keep your this spend down, that spend down. The most expensive thing you're ever going to pay for is your staff or your external consultants or whatever. They're always going to be the most expensive thing. So paying a couple of % more on your server run cost or paying a load of extra money on engineers to look after it. Let's just take the server cost. It's easier. The accountants are less happy because quite a lot of the time that comes out of different pots of money, but it's all funny money anyway. Does it matter? Probably not.
Yeah, I've had these discussions with people a lot of the time, and yet I still don't understand why people focus so much more on those IT costs than the people costs, because as you say, the computers are usually a lot cheaper to run than people who need to have a roof over their head and heating and food.
Yeah, I mean, historically for big companies, it's because it's come out of different budgets. So back when I worked, because I'm evil in a past life and worked for financial services firms, every head count came out of various different bits of budget, whereas the servers came out of a different set of money and they had their own allocated budgets. It was all just completely arbitrary because it's all the same money at the end of the day, but it's just different numbers in different boxes on a spreadsheet. And people get quite defensive over their own box.
Yeah. Power struggles on the Excel spreadsheet.
The entire internet is powered by the entire internet's powered by Excel, isn't it? In the back end. So I've heard.
Disgustingly so.
More of it than people would care to admit.
Yeah. I have a question about this article, though, which I don't know if either of you can answer. Does this only apply to Windows containers running on Fargate? Could you not apply the same logic to ECS?
From that article, they said it only applies to Fargate on ECS, not other container platforms such as EKS. So if for whatever reason you're using Kubernetes, it's not going to affect you. But you probably have more problems to deal with if you are
you're running Kubernetes.
Yeah. You're probably not going to notice that problem yet.
Yeah, it's important to note that Fargate is a resource it's as a capacity availability service rather than a service in its own right. So Fargate sits behind ECS or EKS. It's not a thing by itself. So it's only a small way of providing capacity to one service. Could you do it with EC2s? Probably not, because realistically you're running Linux-backed EC2s if you're doing it in EC2. And the only reason you're ever going to really do that is if you've got consistently high utilization, I would think.
Yeah, if you're managing to max out your utilization there, you're probably spending quite a lot of time optimizing it already. This sounds like an easier option. Again, where your time is the most precious resource there, then it will just make it happen for you without having to think too much about it.
Magic. That's what we like about the cloud magic. So on that note, let's move along to our next article, which is bit of a feature announcement for CloudWatch. This was an announcement last week that Amazon CloudWatch Logs has announced live tail streaming CLI support. So Iain, I'll come to you first on this one. Does this float your boat?
Yeah, well, because I'm a bit of a CLI enthusiast, let's say. If I can do it in the CLI, that's where I normally start, because it's self-documenting, it's easier to reproduce. If I can do something in the console, if it's a one-off quick thing, yeah, fine. But when I start needing to take a screenshot to document things and then describe how I got to that point, well, maybe it's easier for someone who's technically enough minded, just copy the command and then you paste that command into the terminal and it reproduces exactly what I did. So I like that. The fact that it didn't have a CLI until now means that it was probably only working in the console and didn't have a proper API behind it. Now it does. But it wasn't that you could not do this in the CLI before. So I'm still a bit confused about what is new behind the scenes here. The CLI for a while now has offered the AWS logs tail command, which basically does the same thing. It does two things. It will get you the last n minutes of messages. You say, I want the last 10 minutes, for example, and it just dumps those. And then it periodically polls for new messages.
I think that's the difference. This smells like it's using a WebSocket. So that's kind of what I think is going on. I mean, I'm not massively excited about this because I don't sit there live tailing logs particularly often. In previous roles, it would have been incredibly useful because you just stay in kind of one place. Fine. makes your life a lot easier. And the term about self-documenting for the console, for listeners that don't sit with their entire lives looking at consoles, it's because consoles have a history of commands that you've run, so you can kind of look at the things that you've done before. They maintain a history. Obviously, a website doesn't do that, so that makes your documentation rather more complicated. I think the difference is, rather than tail getting you the last N minutes and then we'll go back every 30 seconds or whatever and getting you a bit more, which is what a lot of the sort of code build type services did beforehand anyway. So they just refresh anyway. Or you can live tail this. Yeah, but you're refreshing every 5 seconds, so I'll just not pay for it. Cool. This is just doing it up to the microsecond because it feels like a WebSocket where the logs are just being pushed to your console rather than it going backwards and forwards. What's the upside of that? If you do it quite a lot, I suppose it's not necessarily cheaper, but it's moving the API requests, because rather than it issuing a new API request every 30 seconds or whatever to get the new block of logs, you're paying for the connection minutes, so the billing goes somewhere else. And I think the free tier is forever free, and you get enough that you get like 700 minutes a month or something like that, I think. I don't know the exact number, but it's enough that you could viably just use it. So it's kind of moving the billing and it's moving the API requests around a little bit. But equally, it does feel like an engineer's pet project. Maybe.
Well, it might make things more efficient from the AWS side, because you mentioned WebSockets. The documentation doesn't explicitly say so, but it does say it's a streaming API that every second it pushes new events over that stream. So it sounds like it's using something like that. Yeah. So in terms of your admin, instead of having, say, 100 pull requests logged in CloudTrail, you could have just one start live trail request. So it tidies up your audit logs. So the small benefits, but it's not really changing the world of logging.
It just makes Unix diehards a little bit happier because they never have to leave the terminal.
Oh yeah, well, I do like to do it in the terminal if I can. And recently I've been needing to debug a lot of Lambda functions, and I don't have a better way of doing it in one environment than just executing the Lambda and checking the log to see what comes out. So
that is the most painful thing that this live tailing generally, not this, kind of solves, because you live tail the group, because every time you execute a Lambda, not every time, but every time you get a new cold start, it will create a new group rather than the stream. So you can just tail slightly above that. You don't have to keep going in and out and in and out and in and out to get your latest logs. So that's nice.
And I've written so many little bash functions to do that, and I hope I don't have to do that anymore. So yeah, I am going to explore this function later to see if it streamlines my workflow a bit.
Well, considering neither of you sounded particularly excited about that was quite an animated discussion. So I think perhaps you're more excited about it than you're prepared to admit to yourself.
To be honest,
we're more dull.
The community has had to solve this problem so many times. If you search for CloudWatch tail, you'll find a Stack Overflow post where so many people have come in and say, I've made a tool to solve this. And there's maybe half a dozen community solutions. My favorite was one called CW by a guy called Luca Grula. And I've corresponded with him over GitHub for suggesting improvements. The main feature that I liked from it was the tail feature. So now maybe I'll just go back to the main CLI for that. AWS's own software eventually eats up all the useful features from the community.
That's just what they do. Yeah,
actually means we don't have to maintain it anymore, so it frees us up to do other things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, go and build something new.
A previous guest, AWS hero Brian Tarbox, once said, may have been on air at the time, the guaranteed way of making AWS fix a problem is work around it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Especially if it works around their billing strategy.
Well, since we got so excited about CloudWatch, let's stick with the subject of CloudWatch on our next article. But we're moving from logs to alarms. And we're a little bit light on AI in this week's episode, but there's a little bit of a sprinkling of AI in this article. So you've got to have some AI in a podcast these days. It's the law. This article is a bit of a how-to article on the AWS Cloud Operations and Migrations blog, teaching you how you can respond to CloudWatch alarms with Amazon Bedrock insights. So, John, I'll come to you first on this one. Exciting stuff.
Have to. I mean,
I did already. You're up. Go.
Damn. So alarms in isolation are not inherently useful. I mean, we have this because we deal with alarms and alerts and things for customers. They're not inherently useful by themselves because such and such a thing has triggered an alarm. Okay, what does that actually mean? If you've got things like external URL monitors where you've got your URL has stopped responding, okay, that's fairly critical. I need to go and look at that. But again, all it's saying is that it's not responding to requests. It's not telling you where the problem is. You need to go and look at the system, work out the context of the alarm, understand the data flows, and kind of all the rest of it. This is kind of helping you to shortcut that a little bit because what it's doing, as I understand, I haven't looked at this in great detail because I've used other services that do things like observability and service maps and all the rest of it, and they're quite good because they sort of get an alert and go, oh, it's there, there's the problem. Great. What it's doing is it's throwing kind of metrics and logs and traces and various events out to Bedrock. You're getting some frequency data, potentially, primary issue, which is always nice because that way you can potentially have more junior engineers or engineers that are newer to the system help diagnose these sorts of things because the AI is going, I think it's over here, Chief, rather than you having to really know where the data flows through the system, because that's kind of the biggest bugbear to supporting things is I don't really understand what's going on here, but I'm getting an alert. I need to start looking at it. And the system's already down, so I don't have time to do proper detailed work on this. I need to know roughly where the problem is very quickly. What are LLMs good at? Giving you a rough idea very quickly. Cool. We like that. And then there's some other bits and pieces that it's pulling in as well, like health events and sort of that kind of thing, which is useful because you might not know that there's been a partial service outage in the region that you happen to be living in, or that one of your servers has been force rebooted because you missed the 7 notifications that they will send you. Fine, okay. It's an interesting article. Is it worth doing for a general SRE? Probably not. I wouldn't think because I don't know, it just feels a bit iffy to me. It feels like another case of AWS could do this with CloudWatch for you, but the blog team decided that they could write about it first.
As a proof of concept, I think it's good, but is it production ready? Well, probably not, but let's see where it goes. It's been published, so apart from the article, the code to make it run is published to GitHub in the AWS samples organization. So you can take that code today and use it. The level of support that AWS offers is unclear. Sometimes AWS
Negligible,
samples,
none.
Well, sometimes the projects are uploaded and then immediately forgotten. Sometimes they continue to be developed and actually they say you can ask AWS support for help from this project. So it's kind of like an open source incubator in a way, but it's too early to know which way this one's going to go. When you look at the article and it shows you an example, that actually excited me. I wish all error messages were this descriptive and helpful. The example they give is a canary fails and it does the root cause analysis automatically and sends you a message that says the issue appears to be related to the DynamoDB table, blah, 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 exceeding its provisioned throughput capacity. Without that solution in place, you would have had to look at different logs, different metrics, and so many different places, as you said, John, to get to that conclusion. If it can just present you with that, that can save a lot of time. But it also there's a lot of questions that it doesn't explain, such as what level of configuration do I have to do to allow it to present these conclusions to me? If I just set up the bare minimum of logging and metrics, does it actually have enough data to go on? Does it even know where to find these bits of data? I don't know. The article doesn't go into that level of detail. So yeah, nice proof of concept, but I would prefer that CloudWatch just does this for me, even if I have to pay extra for it, than me having to set up extra infrastructure to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the rub. I've been consulting now. You're an independent consultant. I've been internal facing Permi SRE a couple of times, and that's great when you don't understand the system. When it's a system you've been working with and supporting for 3 to 6 months, let's say, because then you kind of understand what's going on. Odds are you're going to get to that conclusion yourself really quickly because you know where the system kind of bottlenecks and falls over. So is it good? I like it. I like it as an idea. I do like rather than just, it's dead. It's dead because of this. And we think here, and here's an idea. That's helpful. That's helpful. But once you understand the system and you've seen the failure modes before, you can get, oh no, it's over there.
Yeah, it feels a bit like say this was built into the CloudWatch console already. It feels a bit like the network access analyzer function. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but you can press a button and AWS will charge you 10 or 20 cents and tell you what's wrong with your network. If you don't know the networking
VPC
setup,
reachability analyzer.
That's the one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't actually know how the network is configured, that can help you save many hours. But once you understand your network, you might actually just know where the problem is.
Yeah, that's the sort of tool that when it came out, I was jumping up and down for joy because I spent literal hours of my life trying to find problems in networks I didn't understand, going, it's a knackle rule. Who uses them?
Yeah.
What worries me about use of AI in this context, though, is what we were talking about in the preamble to this show today is hallucinations. My experience of using AI is that it does have a habit of making things up on occasion. And, how would you know that it's not saying, yes, it's over there, when actually it's in completely the opposite direction? Is it going to send engineers on a wild goose chase because the LLM has hallucinated a potential solution to a problem? Is that a risk, do you think? Or
it depends on how good your alerting is, because if you're giving it just site down and it doesn't have any other data, then fine, it could genuinely hallucinate quite badly. But the point with this, and this is kind of the point with prompt engineering and RAG and tuning and kind of all the rest of it, the more data you give an LLM, the less it hallucinates because it knows more about the topic area. And what's it saying in this? It's saying that it's looking at CloudWatch metrics and logs and X-ray traces and health events and alarm history and information about the canary itself and Bedrock. Fine. You've given it quite a lot of data there. You can do a lot to go on. Whether they're doing things like RAG or not, don't know. I haven't dug into the example in great detail. I wouldn't be enormously worried because, like I say, so long as your alerting is set up and your monitoring is good, so you've not just got the "is it alive or dead" Jim, to use a Star Trek quote, "is it dead Jim?" You've also got your various other alerts and your monitors in place. What it will have seen is it's dead. Oh, the provision throughput graph is okay, and then it's done that. It's what it's done is it's done what you would have done if you were looking at a dashboard. You'd have seen the alert, you'd have brought the dashboard up and gone, "Oh, that graph's trending very high."
yeah, fair enough.
Carl, the question about hallucinations, I think, as John said, it's more likely to happen when your base language model is just going on what it has. It might be nice enough to say, I just don't know, but depending on how you configure it, it might bend over backwards to give you something that sounds like an answer. But the base model doesn't know anything about your environment. The only way this can work at all is by the data that you're feeding into it. So you have to trust that data. If you're feeding it the wrong data, well, that's on you. So I wouldn't be worried about that. I would be more worried about how well it can match up an event that triggers it to the relevant data. But that is a problem that we always face. Can you actually trace through the system to find the source? I was quite skeptical of these generative AI services in general until just a few weeks ago when I saw a talk about Bedrock from another community builder, Sana Shah. She did a demo of Bedrock and a use case for her. So her use case is that she is the leader of the Berlin Women's User Group. And as you guys will know, running a user group or running any kind of activity around AWS takes up a lot of time, and you need all the help that you can get. So she showed us how to use Bedrock as a personal assistant. And I think using the same base model as this one uses, the cloud language model, but it doesn't know anything about the Berlin Women's User Group, and it doesn't know an awful lot about the state of the gender gap in employment. And that's her main motivation for setting up a women's user group, because only about 10% of the population of tech workers are women. and she wants to do something to help change that. So she fed Bedrock information about her user group, information from an NGO, I don't remember which, reporting on the state of this globally, and it was able to answer questions about this. It knows how to construct basic English sentences because it's got a language model that shows it how to do that. But the statistics and the information about her user group, that was all taken from curated documents. So it wasn't going to hallucinate about those things because it had been configured to retrieve facts from these documents, like a database looking up records.
Fair enough.
So yeah, I'm not worried about the hallucination, but the old questions about is it going to find the data that is there, and is the data that is there good enough? That's on us as much as on the AI here.
It's the way it's always been in IT: crap in, crap out.
Exactly.
But yeah. On that note, let's skip along to our next article for this week, which is a article all about CloudFront. It's on the networking and content delivery AWS blog, and I think it was last week, 4th of June, this article was produced, where they were introducing the CloudFront hosting toolkit. A nice, concise title for an AWS blog. Normally, they're multiple lines and a bit of a mouthful that make my teeth fall out. But introducing the CloudFront hosting toolkit is quite an easy one to say. Yeah, so Iain, what's exciting about the CloudFront hosting toolkit?
So in the article, they acknowledge that for setting up a website, Amplify is a really good way to get started. And I host my personal website using Amplify because you just take your source code and plug it into a CI system. You don't even have to write your own CI. It comes up with a template for popular static blog generators. I'm using Jekyll, so it has a template for Jekyll, and it hosts your website. Behind the scenes, CloudFront is used, S3 is used, but you don't have to know about any of that, and you don't have to configure it. And that's great as long as the way it configures it works for you. But you'll get to a certain point where you might want to change the settings, and then, well, I don't think you really have much control over that. The problem is the leap from using Amplify, where it's all just handled for you, to having a solution that you have complete control over is quite a big one. That's why I chose to use Amplify. I wanted to learn more about using CloudFront and S3, but configuring that in my spare time could have taken a week, and I just wanted to host a blog. So Amplify seems like a good compromise. Now, the CloudFront hosting toolkit promises to have a ready-made solution where you can just run a command to make it all happen. And then when you're ready to tweak it, you can. But it's giving you sensible defaults and exposing them all so that when you're ready, you can change them. But you don't have to set that all up by yourself. So when I'm ready to have another look at the internals of my website, I barely have time to write new articles on it myself. But when that comes around, I will be excited to use CloudFront Hosting Toolkit. There have been many community attempts at doing that, but it depends on how much time and how much interest the author has. So there's a few projects on GitHub that haven't been touched in 7 or 8 years. So then you start to become wary of it because which new features is it unaware of in those 7 and 8 years? So maybe you are better starting from scratch. But this just came out last week. So I'm hoping that it is all up to date and that AWS is committed to maintaining it. Again, we'll see how that goes. But if they're willing to support it, then I'd be willing to use it.
John, thoughts on it?
Yeah, my personal site is a thing of utter disgust to me. It's Jekyll, and it sits on GitHub pages because I didn't want to pay for anything, so it went there. Now, of course, I have lots of AWS credits because Community Builders, and I got my second lot of credits come through, so I could maybe pay a few quid for it to go and live somewhere. So maybe I'll look at this, maybe, because it was on my list of things to rebuild because, blogging and kind of all the rest of it. I've done it through the company blog and Dev.to and Medium, and there's no one can sort of, it lives here. So might be worth looking at. On the commercial side, though, I do wonder what the target of this is. I think it was Corey Quinn. I saw it in his newsletter earlier today. Maybe this is a stab at something like Vercel, because that is, again, reasonably dev-friendly, CDN kind of baked into it. There you go. Okay. Maybe that's what this is targeting. because front-end devs are not infrastructure people, fundamentally. They're not. And this isn't a jab at front-end devs. It's not their competency, in the same way that I'm not a front-end dev, I'm an infrastructure guy. So, yeah.
So I was going to ask, is there potentially a risk with this, that if you start with this and could you outgrow it? Do you then have to try and unpick everything that it's built, or do you have to start again? I think we've seen that sort of thing in the past with Amplify, where people have kind of gone off down that road and realized that, it was great for day one operations, but, once their site or their application becomes more complex, they kind of outgrow the functionality, and then it's kind of, how do we reverse engineer this? Do we need to start all over again? Is there a risk with that here?
Well, I would hope that CloudFront hosting toolkit would help you avoid that kind of dead end. If you were ever going to run into that with Amplify, I haven't used it enough to know how you would get into that state. But say there was a point where you would outgrow it, CloudFront hosting toolkit is instead of using Amplify. So you would already have the flexibility to get out of that situation. Amplify, I've already run into one sharp edge with it. It's absurdly complicated and convoluted to get out the access logs. Behind the scenes, there is a CloudFront distribution running, but because you don't have visibility of that distribution in your account, you can't just access its logs, which presumably are stored in S3. There's an API that Amplify gives you that you need to call, and it goes away and does everything in the background, returns it in a slightly different format, and only returns it in chunks of 2 weeks. If you need longer than that, you need to batch up the calls by yourself. I've written part 1 of a blog series explaining how to do this. I still haven't gotten around to writing part 2 because this is just my personal blog. Come on, it shouldn't be this hard. Someone else I discovered on the internet has already written a similar blog series and going into, once you've got this data, here's all the analysis that you can do, but it shouldn't be that hard just to get the access logs. By using CloudFront explicitly, you avoid that weirdness. I hope that the Amplify team solves that problem, because it's supposed to be the competitor to things like Vercel and so on. But if it's making analytics so difficult, well, yeah, people are going to outgrow it whenever they need to do serious analytics.
Yeah, understood. Conscious of time, guys, but we have got one more article which I know that you're both very excited about. So everyone's favorite subject, tax. I think we haven't talked about tax on the podcast before, but let's talk about tax. There was an announcement last week that AWS has launched a tax settings API to programmatically manage tax registration information. This is something we come up again, banging our heads against time and time again. We haven't set the tax inheritance on that account. Therefore, we've got all these separate bills, and it's a bit of a pain in the bum. Is this going to make life easier?
I guess that's the idea. I mean, let's do. I'm going to assume that the listeners understand what tax is. Let's start with that. But if you don't, it's theft. Taxation is. It's not. It's okay. What this refers to is in territories where you pay sales tax, or in the UK we call it VAT, because apparently buying something adds value. That's what it stands for, is value added. I don't feel that it does, but whatever. And different territories levy different quantities of a percentage on that. I think the US is a standard 15% federal sales tax. The UK, it's 20%. Other territories have other rates. Why is this important? You pay VAT or sales tax on your AWS bill. Fine. It's a taxable item. Okay. Views on tax aside, we can accept that it's a taxable item. If you are running workloads in different territories and they are owned by different headquartered companies, i.e. your US stuff is being run and billed through the US and your UK stuff is being run and billed through the UK, it's right that you should pay the applicable sales tax for that territory, because you don't want to be paying UK sales tax on your US income and vice versa, because the tax people get very annoyed at you when you pay the wrong tax, and you don't want to pay too much. Cool. Inheritance means that you can have one tax setting for every account in your organization, and that's useful for some scenarios. But for the scenarios I've just discussed, you can't do that, because you genuinely need different tax settings for different accounts. If you've got 1 or 2 accounts in one territory, fine, okay, set it and forget it. But if you've got 1,000 accounts in an organization, all of a sudden that becomes a complete pain. Hopefully this makes it easier. Well, I suspect what's going to happen is we'll see either an AWS supported or community abstraction, is the word I'm looking for the tax settings, so that you can sort of say, all of these accounts need to go over there, all these accounts need to go over there. And you can kind of do that now, but again, it's not great. So anything that allows you to do things programmatically, even with tax, more better.
Iain, quick thoughts on this one?
Yeah, the programmatic part was the missing piece. You've been able to control all these settings in the console, but you can't automate that. And I've had a customer that through mergers and acquisitions, you've got maybe half a dozen different tax settings groups that apply to different AWS accounts in the same organization. So you can't just use tax inheritance to use a single setting in the management account and have everything else use that. You need to know which tax settings apply to each account, and you have to go into the console to copy and paste settings from another one. And then because sometimes the people who need to look at these values are not the same people with access to AWS, you need to copy it to another internal website, and these things get out of sync very easily, and it's just a lot of hassle. So I'm hoping with the ability to programmatically set the new values and the ability to programmatically export them, we can just automate that pain away. And when you look at the documentation for the new API, you start to understand why it took AWS so long to expose this, because there's a long list of exceptions for certain countries. Bangladesh has a special rule, Brazil has a special rule, all the way down to Turkey. So they've had to expose this as a robust API, they've had to automate the world's tax rules to a certain extent, but that's no easy task. So hats off to them. But again, why it's interesting for me as someone who has to manage an organization with internal different tax rules is it allows me to script this. I no longer have to go in and fiddle about in the console and risk getting things out of sync. And
nice.
I'm ashamed to say that the tax settings part was the most exciting one for me this week. It's not the most exciting topic in general. Maybe I'm just getting boring as I approach middle age, but it is the first one that I saw that solves an immediate problem for my customer. I've already shared this with them, and they are also excited about it because it will save pain.
John is also a closet tax lover. He loves faded HMRC. He does it every week. I think he likes the operators on the other end of the phone.
I don't like the 25-minute hold time, which honestly is an improvement. It's, UK PAYE is a complete shambles if you have anything other than the simplest of tax affairs. What also doesn't help is I know more about UK tax legislation than HMRC call handlers seem to.
See, I told you, he loves tax. But on that note, we have reached the end of our time for this week. That was season 3, episode 22 of Logicast. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, if you enjoyed it, tell your friends. You can download us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see what faces we're pulling when we're talking to you, we're also available to stream on YouTube. Thank you, Iain, for joining us today as our guest. It's been great to have you along and to hear your insights. And thank you, John, as always, for your insights as well. We'll be back with another episode of Logicast for you next time. See you again next week. Cheers.